Hi, this is Paul. I'm obviously back in Sacramento. Got in last night from Thunder Bay. I drove with Luke and Jens from Thunder Bay and Ethan from Reno, who helped us build our fence from Thunder Bay down to Minneapolis, and then had a direct flight from Minneapolis to Sacramento. And it was raining in Sacramento when I got in, which was unusual for mid-September. So I'm back and full of a lot of thoughts from the conference. I wanted to do something today, and I've got about 20 thoughts for videos in my head, but I only have time to do one. And so I thought I might talk more about the conference and maybe give a little taste of, it was sort of the lecture I gave, but I'll probably expand on it or change it, given that I had to expand on it and change it from the night that I gave it, and I'll talk more about that. Now, why did, this is actually the first slide I had for my lecture. Why did people come to the conference? I did a video that you can watch with Catherine and Luke and Mark, all of them quite active on Bridges of Meaning Discord. And the conference was really good. And the conference was really good. I think a lot of people were very satisfied, very happy they went. Why? The conference was different. Those of you who were in Europe at the German festival, at a dinner Sunday night after the conference, Scott, the abbot of Urban Abbey, said, have any of you ever been to a conference like this? And I paused for a moment and thought, I was just at a conference exactly like this, but that one was in Germany. So then I asked Catherine, who was also at that dinner, I said, Catherine, did you talk to the German festival people before they did their conference? She said, yeah, I told them exactly the plan of this conference. And Cassidy said, well, we'll do something just like that, which in fact they did. So in fact, both conferences were very similar. Now, both conferences were different in that there were different speakers. At the German festival, we had myself and Burn Power, and John Vindonk and two more V's did some music, and it was a little bit shorter, but and of course Cassidy and Sarah did a podcast interview, and that actually the Cassidy Sarah conversation was for me a highlight of the German festival. I thought it was a tremendous conversation. And I haven't seen any video yet from the German festival, not putting any pressure on you, Cassidy, but there's a ton of footage from that festival, and they had microphones and wires and cameras, multiple cameras. So I'm anticipating that the video coming out of the German festival will be excellent, as it will from the Thunder Bay conference. So those of you who didn't get a chance to go to either of those events, you'll get to see the video. But I think as many who went to the conference will attest, watching a video is not anything like being at these conferences. And basically, this is making me think that we need to do a lot more events like these. Why? As some people noted about the Thunder Bay event, it wasn't educational per se. Now, I learned a bunch of things, but that really wasn't the focus. The focus was much more relational. People got a chance there was a lot of access to the speakers. Now, even though I don't know the total number of people that were there over the 3 days, probably between 150 and 200 went through. Some people went to different things. We had paintball for Jesus on Friday morning in the rain. And then after we played paintball for a couple of hours, we had a lunch, and Jonathan Peugeot and I, both of whom played paintball. Instead of playing more airsoft or paintball in the afternoon, Jonathan and I basically sat in the building there where we had lunch and just kept talking. And we had a number of really wonderful conversations with a lot of people who are watching these videos and have questions and stories to share. And for me, that is the big takeaway from these events. And it's not just getting a chance to have conversations with Vanderklay or Peugeot or Vervaeke or Byrne or John Van Donk. It's getting to build relationships with each other. It's getting to compare notes. It's getting to have a sense that you are part of something that is important and growing, but it's not exactly easy to say what exactly this thing is. So paintball was great, and it was a lot of fun. I'd never done paintball before, but for me, paintball wasn't as much fun as meeting, and you know who you were, over at lunchtime by the paintball, getting to hear many of your stories. Those of you who have watched this channel for a long time know that's part of the reason I do the Randos videos, and the Randos videos will start up again. Don't worry. The Randos, although I gave away a lot of rando slots when I was in Europe and in Thunder Bay, people would ask for them, and I just get their email address and say, okay, well, let's just grab you a slot ahead of time. So I know that sort of works against the whole randomness of it, but there it is. And then, so that was during the day Friday, and then a little bit of off time in the afternoon where I could work on my speech. And then the evening began with John Vervaeke giving a really fine lecture on consciousness. Now these are my notes from Vervaeke's lecture, and I was taking notes furiously and having some panic while John was talking, realizing how little I know about consciousness. And here I have to give a talk, and I have to give a talk right after John gives a talk where he's talking about basically the 5 A's of consciousness: awakeness, awareness, access, authority, aspectuality. What does consciousness do? He went through various theories about consciousness that are out there in the academy. The nature of consciousness, the function of consciousness, talked about hot theories, higher order thought theory, recursion, automatic processing, chunking, putting things together, etc., etc. And John was giving this lecture, and I was just sort of thinking, I'm going to stand up there and look like an idiot. And in a minute, you'll see why I thought that. But that, at some point, I think part of my panic listening to John's lecture, part of it was ego. I didn't want to stand up there and look like an ignoramus with respect to something that I'm supposed to now stand up and talk to people about, because all of my thinking about consciousness is sort of layman's thinking about consciousness. It's, the stuff that I've read. Obviously, I know nothing compared in this respect compared to this academic from the University of Toronto. So I was panicking a little bit, and even Jonathan Peugeot said, "Yeah, when you first got up," and so one of the kids of the conference organizers, their kids were wonderful. I loved meeting their kids, and just about everybody who went to the conference was really impressed by Eamon and Catherine's kids. And he comes up to me while I'm furiously taking notes during the John Vervaeke lecture and says, "So you're going to wing it?" And I thought, I might, because I think I need another plan before I give the talk I'm going to give. Now, what I kind of thought about this video is that I'd run through some of the slides that I went through. Now, most of the conference talked about consciousness. Very little of the conference actually talked about the interface of consciousness and conscience. So I pretty much decided that my talk on Friday night was going to be about consciousness. And I was also slated to give a sermon Sunday morning, and well, it's a sermon, so conscience can come into that. This is another slide that I didn't put up because I sort of reworked my talk. Also, as is often the case when you go to something like this, very few venues are really set up to do PowerPoint well, and nothing against Urban Abbey, but they're not set up, obviously, like Living Stones is set up to do PowerPoint, because I do PowerPoint every Sunday, so we've pretty much got it down to a science, as they say. But I was going to do a little bit of reflecting on what this movement is about. And Teddy, in anticipation of the German festival, was doing a number of conversations on his channel with people. And one of the things that I really felt this summer is that the movement, the community, is still divided by an ocean. And as I've been saying, and John and Jonathan and John have heard it, and I think they're up for it, is we want to do something like this in Europe. And in Europe, I asked a lot of people the questions, and please weigh in the comment section, because I said, would it be better if, let's say, the three of us did something, let's say something in the UK and then something in Germany or the Netherlands, or a number of people said, why don't you do something in a cheaper place to go? Because the UK is one of the more expensive places to be in Europe, as is the Netherlands. I imagine Germany is sort of near the top two. If we did something in Eastern Europe, we might be able to get a super cool facility where people could travel to and stay at a very reasonable rate and do something there. And I think part of what made Thunder Bay really powerful, a number of people said this to me, was that we did it in a sort of out-of-the-way place, which meant that everyone who wanted to go there really wanted to be there, because there were some people who were local, and I think they were deeply appreciative that they got an event like that so close to home. But for others, for me, I flew into Minneapolis, then I drove 6 hours with Luke and Jens up to Thunder Bay. And big thanks to Jens for driving the whole way, and for Jens and Luke, I tried to give them money for gas, and they didn't want to take my money. But that was just a huge thing. And for me also, just the car trip aspect of it. Ethan came back with us because he was flying out of there too. The car trip aspect of it, again, for me, is just part of the amazing thing about these events, because I got to know Jens, who's a really cool guy, runs a thrift store, a religious thrift store in Minneapolis. Of course, got to get to know Luke better. And of course, I've spoken with Luke a lot, but it was just wonderful to be with Luke in person and to just have fun. My son Jared was with us in the car, and Ethan in the car on the way back. We had a pretty not a heated argument. We had a passionate discussion about Jordan Peterson's tweets and the Hurwitz video, which was absolutely tremendous. And that's what we want. We don't just want more information. YouTube can carry information. What we want is community. What we want is to know each other. And for me, a big part of this conference was that I got to know Jonathan and John in a much more personal way. At sort of the first speakers lunch that we had, I sat across the table from Jonathan, and Christopher Mastro Pietro was there, and some of the conference speakers and plus ones and organizers, and it was just a wonderful time around a meal to get to know each other and talk some shop about some of the things that we're doing, but also just get to know each other on a personal level, have some fun, laugh about some things, worry about some things. And then the meal Sunday evening after the conference was done, I got to sit next to John Vervaeke and again, just really deepen the relationship and get to know each other on a deeper level. And that for me was just the gold of the conference, getting to know these guys better, getting to know many of you better who went there. And I know that I'm sure there are some of you who have liked to have spent more time and had more access, and I'm sorry about that. That's limited in terms of time and space, but I know that some of you had, we had a fair amount of access, and you got to tell me your stories, and you got to share how you got here and where you're at and where you're stuck and what's going on. That's what this thing is about. And again, that's why I started this whole thing. When I saw Jordan Peterson's meteoric rise, when I saw that he was attracting a lot of attention and people were getting energized by what he was doing, I knew people needed to have a community. You can be inspired and thrilled and you can clean your room, but unless you have a community around you, it's not going to last. And part of what's needed is that there be institutions, and I don't necessarily mean, 501c3 corporations, although those are fine too, but institutions and traditions so that people can regularly get together and relationships can deepen and relationships can be formed and networks can be formed, so that all of this transformation has a way to just, in the church we say, edify. I think part of what we've started is we've now sort of developed a template for the kind of gatherings we might want to have. Now, there's no fixed rule. We've played with it. We had pie on the way back to Minneapolis with a couple of other attenders and got some really good feedback in terms of ways, probably using the Estuary protocol to get some more one-on-one or small group breakout conversations throughout the conference, so that you listen to something and you can process it. Part of the reason I do the videos that I do is so often I'll listen to a video and I think, if I listen to that video once, it's almost a waste of time. The first time through the video is really sort of to see what's there. Is there anything good there? The second time through the video, might not listen to the whole thing, but I might go to certain sections and say, this is something I really need to pay attention to. This is something I need to think through. And that's, of course, why I make the kinds of videos that I make. And to be able to do this at a conference is so much more transformative than just sitting and listening to a podcast or watching a video. And those who were there will say, a number of people said to me during the conference, to watch this on YouTube, that's really cool, but it's nothing like being here. Being here is so much more. And it was so much more. So I said it on a previous thing. I mean, part of my thinking about sort of the evolution of this is that, remember Pangburn and what he did and how that collapsed? I'm not thinking that. I'm thinking you have estuaries, and we did some estuary samples at this conference too, and I thought it was very well received. And then if you have significant places of estuaries, let's call them an estuary hub. And in an estuary hub, and something is an estuary hub because they not only host estuaries, but they host bigger events. So in many ways, Chicago and Germany were kind of the first out of the gate as estuary hubs. The idea is in Chino at Cross Point Church in Southern California, where John Vendonka's at. I met with their staff and talked about, I didn't have the language then for it, and talked about doing bigger events down there. And so maybe that will happen. They have a wonderful facility, and they're a decent-sized church, so they could actually pull it off. I'm going to be talking to my local guys here about what would it take for us to do an event like we did. And it doesn't have to be myself and Peugeot and John all the time. That's probably not going to work for any of the three of us. But what we'll probably want to do is to begin to put together a list of people, and I think that list will continue to grow. It would be fun to have Ian McGilchrist participating in something like this. I think about Rafe Kelly, who on Twitter I think was really having some FOMO that he wasn't there. And I think about Rick Rapetti. I think about a lot of the guys that John has talked to, a lot of the guys that I've spoken with, a lot of the guys that Jonathan has on his channel. I think about Richard Rowland and the Universal History guy. He would be awesome to have at something like this. Christopher Mastro Pietro was there, but he didn't speak. And Christopher would be a tremendous guy to get on stage and do some dialogos. And so we've got a good list of people that I think can be brought into these estuary hub spaces for events. And once we get enough of these places going, there can be, something of a circuit where people can, there's a decent amount of repetition that people will know. I can go to one of these places, and we're going to have to figure out sort of the economics of this. The Thunder Bay conference was more expensive than the German conference. I'm thinking, and some of that's important because, in Europe, the trip that John and I took, we basically just, as much as possible, tried to cover costs, and got a bit of an honorarium from the UK event with Tom Holland, got some from the Bamberg Priory event in Northern Ireland, and the German festival pledged to, they put us up in a nice Airbnb and they fed us, and they pledged to cover the airfare, at least part of the airfare. So, basically we're putting that thing together on a shoestring. But increasingly, a lot of these guys who are making their money through this are going to need a decent size honorarium. And so the conferences are going to have to generate enough income to pay for that. At the same time, it's important that the conferences not be prohibitively expensive so that people can't go. And I was thinking in terms of Living Stones, I might have two levels. We might have, let's say, 100 tickets at a certain price, and I'd have to work that out with our local guys. And then maybe have a certain number of volunteer tickets. And basically, the deal with the volunteer tickets is you get access to the event. You can participate in the event, but you're also going to be doing some work while you're at the event, because it took a whole lot of work from the Urban Abbey and Catherine and Eamon and their kids and Scott and Jenny, his wife, I said Jenny was like Janet in The Good Place. Everywhere she was playing the violin, she was playing the piano, she was playing the guitar, she was making soup. Everywhere you looked, she was someplace doing something. And it was like, wow, how many of these are there in this building? Upstairs, and Scott was doing the same thing. He was barista he was running out and getting me a clicker for my PowerPoint. He's doing all of these things. So that might be a way to make it accessible, even for those for whom the cost is prohibitive. In the German festival, a number of people camped. I looked in Northern Ireland. There'd be plenty of grounds there to camp, and I thought here at Living Stones too, I got people camping on the grounds all the time. Why not have a few more campers? I'll leave the bathroom open for you, though, and encourage you to use it. So find a way to make this model work. And again, the point of the model is not simply education. And that's where, let's say, camping, when you come to something like this, that's part of the community. It's, Paintball for Jesus is part of the community. And figuring out how to do events like this. And again, generally speaking, this kind of thing grows and emerges. Nobody's really smart enough to think about it. And I'm sure Catherine now at the end of this is thinking about, okay, next time I do it, I'm going to do it in a different way. I'm sure Cassidy and Matthias are thinking, okay, next time we do this, we're going to do this in a different way. And so it's going to evolve as these things go. So that's my idea about this. I don't know if I should keep going with the slides, or just kind of keep this short and maybe do a second video more with the talk that I was going to do. Maybe I'll do that, because some of you, it's sort of a separate subject. So I'll just land the plane here.